Lewis Hamilton has been struggling after the overhaul of technical regulations back in 2022. The W14 is not up to Hamilton's liking. What's worse, George Russell has been able to extract more performance than Hamilton out of the W14. Hamilton hasn't had to deal with teammate rivalries since 2016. Can Lewis cope with a competitive teammate, or is it causing issues within the team? Let's find out in today's episode. George Russell joined Mercedes in 2022, and to everyone's surprise, Russell was able to perform a step above the team's star driver Lewis Hamilton. Russell outperformed his teammate in every category, except for the number of laps he has raced in the 2022 season. Outperforming your teammate is a driver's first goal, but to outperform Lewis Hamilton on his first year in the team, that is something remarkable. Considering only 2 drivers have been able to achieve that feat, the 2 being Jenson Button and Nico Rosberg. Felipe Massa made his comments about this, and he was surprised by Russell's performance. "I trust him to do that," Massa explained of Russell's title-challenging credentials. Don't forget, last year, in his first season at Mercedes, he left Lewis behind in the World Championship. An incredible achievement. Before that, only Nico Rosberg in 2016 had achieved this in Lewis's entire career. George is a top driver. George Russell started his F1 career at Williams. He drove one of the weakest cars in Formula 1. He learned to drive cars that don't perform perfectly every weekend. He has driven cars that lose the back end way too often or just understeer too much. When he made the move to Mercedes, everyone thought that Russell will not need these skills. Mercedes are good at making competitive cars, as they were dominant force for 8 years. But in 2022, right when Russell moved in, Mercedes were not at the top of the pecking order. Both drivers had to fight with an underperforming car, and it was George Russell who was able to extract the maximum, partly due to his experience he has carried from Williams. One reason for Hamilton's poor 2022 showing could be due to the fact that he has tested a lot with the W13 to make it a better car. But in 2023, none of that is happening. And yet, Russell is able to outperform the 7-time world champion. Lewis is still Mercedes' #1 driver, and for good reason. While George has shown his driving qualities, he's the future of Mercedes. And as far as the team are concerned, the 2 are free to race. Lewis hasn't had great relationships with his teammates when he's been challenged by them. You can give a line of examples like Fernando Alonso, Nico Rosberg, and even Jenson Button at some instances. George is hungry to get back to the front, as Lewis Hamilton is. So, Russell will be challenging Hamilton all the way, this season and even in the future. Considering Lewis's previous records with competitive teammates, it's not surprising that things at the Mercedes garage is starting to get heated somewhat. Hamilton got beaten by Russell at the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, both in qualifying and the race. The young Briton was approximately 4/10 faster than the old Briton during qualifying at Jeddah, and the 7-time world champion finished 5 seconds behind the young Briton at P5. After the race at Jeddah, Hamilton pointed out that luck helped Russell to get a better setup than Hamilton for Saudi Arabia. "I think if I had to set up George had, I would have been in a better position," he said. "There was like a 50-50 choice. I chose one way. He chose another. More often than not, where he went was the wrong one, but it just happened to work." Maybe Lewis is right. Maybe the setup George chose was the wrong one, but it happened to work at Jeddah this instance. Instead of just congratulating his teammate's performance, Lewis took a shot at Russell. This comment might not be implying that much meaning, but Russell had something to say about it. Russell implied that nothing comes by luck, and he did work hard to get the car in a better window. "I don't think there's any luck in it at all," he said in Thursday's driver press conference for the Australian Grand Prix weekend. "I think it's down to the preparation you put in before the event. The changes we made overnight, I knew that was going to be the right direction with the work we did with the team. And I believed I was going to be better than the setup that Lewis opted for. I think everybody's got different preferences. I was happy with the direction I took and the work I'm doing with the engineers." It's pretty clear that George is not happy, after Hamilton calling his odds a 50-50. Sure, when you work hard and get all together, you would not want anyone to call that result just luck. Lewis made a sort of an apology to George, but it was not a 100%. Let's go ahead and check that out. "I think people probably, from my choice of words at the weekend. I want to reiterate how great a job George did on the weekend," the 7-time world champion said. "I think the thing I was commenting on is that there's one specific thing that you can change in the suspension that you have to do over Friday night. And when you make the change once you start P3, you can't change it for the rest of the weekend. So, when you make that change, you're basically rolling the dice. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I've done it in the past. Sometimes it hasn't worked. Sometimes it has. And it worked great for George and he did a great job. You see what I mean? It starts like an apology, and then later he says you are basically rolling the dice. Clearly, Hamilton's opinion is that Russell's setup was down to luck mostly. Lewis doesn't like to be beaten by his teammates, no Formula 1 driver does. But these comments seems like Hamilton is trying to find excuses. Next, we head into the Australian Grand Prix, and the Albert Park track has requirements similar to Jeddah Corniche. But will Lewis Hamilton be able to find something within the W14 that can help him close the gap to Russell and the front runners? Jenson Button had some interesting things to say about the whole Hamilton versus Russell situation. Button said Russell is a great team player and driver, but implied that Hamilton would be back once he sorts his issues out. All I can say is it's fun to watch and it's not going to stop there, Hamilton's ex-teammate Button told Sky Sports. You've got two very competitive drivers. Russell last year was a very big team player, which he should be, his first time in the team. Now things get a little bit serious between the two of them. They have got a car that's not quite there, but they are out there to beat each other. George did a good job at the last race and I'm sure Lewis will come back at him here, but he didn't have the balance he liked. Maybe he was right, maybe George did get a bit lucky that the setup direction they went in was better. But you develop your setup through a race weekend and maybe if you see George is strong, follow that direction. Sky Sports' Carrig Slater claims the gap between Hamilton and Russell is a huge gap. Maybe that stung Lewis a bit. Lewis said that if he had the same setup as George, or if he hadn't made a setup mistake, he wouldn't just be matching George's pace, he'd be beating it. Maybe a subtle implication that he'd be ahead. George, I think, is standing his ground, resisting the notion that it was only his setup or only the fortuitous way that the two garages went with how they angled the wing of the car on the day. By the time editing this video, the quali session at the Australian Grand Prix was done, and oh dear, was it a thrilling 1 hour. From the part of Perez's retirement, up to the close battle between Verstappen, both Mercs and both Aston Martins, it was full of action. The most important thing to note, Mercedes had a better showing at Albert Park. Still, Russell was able to out-qualify Hamilton by the barest of margins. Maybe Hamilton's lap was affected by traffic, but still, Russell starts alongside Verstappen at tomorrow's race. Toto confirmed Mercedes won't be bringing major upgrades for the W14 till Imola, so both drivers should make the most with what they have, considering Hamilton's history with teammates and keeping in mind Russell's continuous success. What would Hamilton be able to do at the Australian Grand Prix? Will Mercedes be able to be Max Verstappen? Is Russell's performance mostly down to luck as Hamilton has claimed? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section down below. We'd love to discuss it with you. And on your way down, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to get notified of our future uploads to keep yourselves up to date about the 2023 Formula 1 season.